Okay, so finally we are live. There were a bunch of technical difficulties, managed to finally sort it out. So I appreciate everyone who was able to stick around. And yeah, so let's get started. So basically, for this live stream, we'll be talking about MedARC's general vision, the sorts of projects that we're working on right now, and also how people can contribute. So the first two presentations will actually be about the projects that that we have currently going on. The first one is one on fMRI image reconstruction. The next one is about fine-tuning stable diffusion with chest X-rays. And then after that, we'll be joined by Emad for brief remarks, and also finally, Jeremy and I will give some presentations about medical AI and the vision for MedARC and how you all can contribute. So yeah, with that said, I think we'll get started here. So first speaker will be Paul Scotti, Dr. Paul Scotti. Hello there. So yeah, I guess I guess you can start here. So I'll just put on your presentation here, and whenever you're ready.
All right, great. Thanks, Tanishq. So hi, everyone. My name's Paul Scotti, and I'm a postdoc at the Princeton Neuroscience Institute, and I'm leading the various fMRI image reconstruction projects going on at MedARC. So I'll talk to you, give an overview about all these projects. They all relate to the overarching goal of doing real-time reconstructions of visual perception from fMRI brain activity. So to be clear about what's going on here, we have human participants that are lying down in an MRI machine, and their brains are being scanned while they're looking at images one at a time. So the data set composes 3D brain volumes paired with images. And the goal is to train a model where you can input a brain volume and output a reconstruction of the image that they were looking at when that brain activity was observed. So here's a timeline of the state of progress regarding this. And you can see that there's been a lot of really great improvements made, particularly in the last year. And I think that that can be attributed to two main things. One is the current AI revolution going on with image generation models. So for instance, stable diffusion, which we are using in our current pipeline for doing these reconstructions. And the other thing is the availability of new large-scale publicly available fMRI data sets. So this gives us enough training data to feed to these hungry machine learning models to be able to do these kind of things. I also want to emphasize at the beginning here that this is a project that's not just sort of a novelty thing. There are a lot of applications that can be important for this. And the reconstructions are not meant to just be a one-to-one relationship between, brain activity and reconstructing the exact original image. So everyone's brain is different. Obviously, we all have our own life experiences. And that means that we all will represent content differently in our brains. And that can be really useful for studying purposes, both clinically and for basic research. So to give a couple examples, so maybe you have a clinical group that seems to present systematic distortions in their reconstructions in a certain way compared to a control group. So those systematic differences in their reconstructions might be able to inform you something about their condition. Maybe you can track their symptoms that way. Maybe you can isolate where in the brain is responsible for those differences in the reconstructions. Another example might be locked-in syndrome, where somebody is conscious but not able to communicate with the outside world, verbally or physically in any way. So you might be able to put that person inside of an MRI machine, have them visualize things mentally, and reconstruct those visualizations as a form of communication. For basic science, you can imagine, so for instance, with memory research, you could track a representation dynamically over time, looking at that reconstruction and how it evolves over the course of learning to better understand memory mechanisms. So there's a lot of applications, basically. But these applications are not immediately practical. You don't see this technology being applied currently. And the reason for that is that you need a lot of data to train these models, and they are currently not generalizable across people. So for instance, an example that I'm showing here at the top right that we're working on in MedARC, this is a reconstruction from a single participant. This participant was scanned for over 30 hours in the MRI machine. So over 25,000 data points of brain image pairs. So there's enough data to train a model specific to the individual to get fairly good looking reconstructions. But if you can't generalize that model to other people, then it's not really practical for the clinical setting or for basically any setting unless you're willing to devote dozens of hours of scanning for individual people. And so what we're working on is trying to figure out a solution to this, to generalize models across people and to eventually reconstruct visual perception from the brain in real time for new patients, new brains in a single fMRI session. And I think that we're in a good position to tackle these pretty ambitious problems. So let me talk a little bit about the background that we have going on here. So our team includes experts in neuroimaging, real-time cloud computing, active learning algorithms. In particular, I want to emphasize that we have experience with cloud computing and real-time fMRI. So in the majority of fMRI studies, you're not really able to do real-time analysis. So the typical workflow for fMRI is that the person's in the scanner for an hour and a half, you're collecting data, you take the person out of the scanner, you pull the data onto your personal machine, you do data cleaning, pre-processing, that takes several hours or so, and then you analyze the data offline. It requires a different workflow in order to analyze the fMRI data immediately, a few seconds following the brain volume acquisition from the scanner. And so we have an open source software package. This was developed in the Norman lab, and we've been working on this. It's already fully developed, and it allows us to do real-time fMRI processing. And it also allows us to do closed loop designs where we can analyze the brain and change what we're presenting to the person in the scanner based on the brain activity that has been recorded. In addition to that, obviously, the other part of this team is the open developer community, right? So I initially joined Lion last summer and met some really incredible people, including Tanishq. And so we've been working on this reconstruction problem since then. However, we have lacked resources. And now that we've moved to MedARC and have support from Stability in terms of compute and data management, this opens the door for us to pursue a lot more ambitious goals. And so we're really excited to ramp things up soon in the MedARC Discord server. So as a roadmap for the different kinds of projects we're working on, first off, we're working on offline brain-to-image reconstruction. So this is using pre-collected data or data that I collect personally at Princeton and analyzing the data offline to try to get state-of-the-art brain-to-image reconstructions. Second off is related to the goal of generalizing the model so that it's not trained from scratch per person. And that would involve training a foundation fMRI model. And the third part of the roadmap is to do the real-time part. So to use active learning to really maximize the efficiency of our data collection so that we can map a new person's brain to a pre-trained pipeline that is trained across many people's brains. So first off, what we've been working on in the Discord server has been doing reconstructions using the natural scenes data set. So this is a large scale data set involving 8 subjects who were each scanned for 30 to 40 hours total, looking at individual images one at a time in the scanner. These were images from MS COCO, complex scenes. And so our pipeline, to give a brief overview of how this works, is that we take the subject's brain activity and we use contrastive learning to map from native brain space into clip space. So this is similar to how CLIP was initially trained, where you're doing contrastive learning between text and images. But in our case, we are not doing text and images, we're doing brain and images. So we're aligning toward to the CLIP image embeddings. Then, now that we have CLIP brain embedding samples, we use a diffusion prior. This is similar to the DALI-2 approach, where we use a diffusion model to better line up these disjointed spaces of brain space and CLIP image space. So then we get even more accurate CLIP brain embeddings. Then we feed those embeddings into Stable Diffusion. Now, typically Stable Diffusion, the input is text prompts, but in our case, we're using a modified variant of Stable Diffusion that was trained by Justin Pinkney that handles image variations. So where the input can be a CLIP image embedding, and then the output are variants of that image. And so we use that model, and that's how we're getting our current reconstructions. We have a lot more ideas for further improving this pipeline, and we haven't really fully evaluated the current state of things, but we're near or already exceeding state-of-the-art offline reconstructions with this. So I'm excited to continue to improve these reconstructions in the Discord. A parallel goal that we're working on is to try to see if maybe there's an easier first step for doing these real-time reconstructions. So obviously reconstructing complex natural scenes is very difficult when the images are so complex. So maybe a more feasible first step for us would be to constrain the stimulus space, the image space. So we're thinking maybe instead of using complex scenes, we try to specifically reconstruct human faces synthesized from StyleGAN2. So the idea with this is that with StyleGAN, you have a latent space that is editable, very comprehensive and cohesive, easier to navigate maybe. It might require less data to get good reconstructions. And so there's like a trade-off here where maybe less data, but a more constrained stimulus space might enable a better first approach of trying to do these real-time reconstructions. So this is kind of in the earlier stages. I've collected one participant's worth of fMRI, 3 hours of them looking at different faces, and that's available to be worked on in MedARC. And the idea here is that we're brainstorming different approaches of what's the best first step. So maybe a more constrained stimulus space is something that would work better, even if we have less data right now for the pre-training aspect of it. But we'll see what works best, obviously. For the, so now getting to the question of aligning different people's brains to the same space. This is an exciting thing that we're brainstorming. It would involve adding an extra step here of a shared subject embedding space. So basically pre-training this embedding space based on lots and lots of offline data of other people's brains. And so you go from a new subject's brain, mapping that into the latent space of this model, and then the rest of the pipeline is the same as what I was sharing on the previous slide. So the current approach that we're thinking about is to use, is to train a self-supervised foundation fMRI model and then fine-tune it with functional alignment. So let me talk about what I mean by the foundation model. Foundation models refer to training on a huge amount of broad, unlabeled data for which there are generalizable downstream applications. I'm sure you've seen the recent progress of these kind of foundation models with images and with text. Usually these models are trained with self-supervision, where you remove a portion of the data and try to have the model predict or recover that removed content. So with this, instead of using text or images, we're using 4-dimensional data, 3D brain volumes across time. And luckily for us, there actually exists a lot of publicly available fMRI data sets already. And so the idea is that we download all of these data sets onto the stability cluster, and we train this sort of foundation model in order to get a latent space that is generalizable across people, tasks, and scanners. The current idea is to adopt an approach similar to a masked autoencoder. So this picture shows how that would work with images, where an image gets divided into patches, and then in this case, 75% of those patches get masked. And then those patches go through an encoder to be into the model latent space. And then it goes through a decoder, it tries to recover the masked patches. And so with the brain, instead of having a two-dimensional image, you have, you're trying to recover cubes of the brain activity of those cubes. And also we can add a temporal component to it of trying to predict what the brain would look like forward in time. And this approach has already shown promise. So this paper used a similar approach on a much smaller fMRI data set, but applying the same idea of masked autoencoders, and showed really good results. So it seems promising that this approach can work with fMRI data. And we have several ideas for how to improve the process that was used in this paper to do even better. So the next step, functional alignment. The idea here is that the foundation model can be fine-tuned to be optimized for a specific task, just like how stable diffusion has been fine-tuned to be optimized for specific tasks for image generation. I think we can fine-tune this kind of foundation fMRI model to be specific for brain-to-image reconstruction. So specifically using data sets where subjects viewed images, whereas the majority of fMRI data sets don't involve subjects looking at images. You can think of this as kind of conditioning, where you have the brain volume and the image, given the smaller range of data sets that have that kind of information to it. And so the idea is that we want to optimize for having similar latent representations across brains when viewing similar visual information. And if that all works, we'll then have this kind of shared subject embedding space where we can map a new person's brain into that embedding space to then serve as the starting point for the rest of the pipeline that we've already shown seems to be working pretty well. I also want to emphasize that the foundation model would have applications outside of just brain-to-image reconstructions, right? So the foundation model could have potential for any sort of clinically informative model. Again, we would be using all public data sets, not just ones where subjects viewed images. And this could serve as a really important pre-processing step, or a way to do rapid personalization of new patients to any sort of clinically informative model. So here I'm showing the full schematic for the real-time approach. So for real-time reconstructions, obviously we are limited in terms of time. Scanning costs money, and we want to be able to map a new person's brain into the model space with as few samples as possible. So basically, we would freeze the bulk of this pipeline, have that all be already trained, and then not mess with it, and then just focus on the arrow going from novel patient into the shared subject embedding space, just working on estimating that mapping. And we can make that estimation more efficient using active learning. So the idea here is that we can use active learning, look at what the model thinks, what is the model most uncertain about, and present images that the model is uncertain about in order to have a better mapping estimation. And Dr. Ben Cowley is an expert in active learning with closed loop systems with neuroimaging. And so he'll be having a large role on this side of the project. And we're contemplating different approaches with active learning by currently developing simulated pipelines, simulating the real-time pipeline with synthetic and real data to test out this active learning setup. Finally, the Algonauts challenge. This is not directly related to the main goal of doing fMRI to image reconstructions, but this is a challenge that I think is very well suited to the MedARC server for the community online. So the Algonauts challenge is organized by leading neuroscientists. It takes place like every 2 years. And this year, they're using the natural scenes data set, and the aim is to spur state-of-the-art encoding models. So the goal for this challenge is given an image, predict the corresponding brain activity. So basically, it's the reverse of our current goal. So it makes sense that we at least try to tackle this challenge as well, I think. For instance, reversing our current workflow and seeing how well we do. And I think when it comes to these sort of online challenges with leaderboards and well-specified deadlines, that can work really well for an online community. So I'm encouraging people that we work together on this as well in the MedARC. All right, so definitely check out the MedARC website and our project page with more information, and I can be contacted via email or on the Discord or on Twitter. And thank you. Looking forward to all the work that we can do together.
Well, yeah, that was a great presentation about about this project. I'm very excited by this project, and I've been seeing how it has progressed over the last few months, and it's been very exciting to see the progress. And the results that we've been getting so far are already quite amazing and exciting. And there's so many amazing directions lots of great directions that we can take this project. So I'm excited to have this project at MedARC, and hopefully a lot of people will also be interested in working on this project as well. So with that, I want to open the floor to any questions. So you can put in the chat if you have any questions. I might ask a couple questions that I know some people may have been interested in. One question I would ask is, what do you, I guess, thinking about it from maybe the ethical standpoint, what are some of the concerns? Because this is the idea is to of course try to figure out what people are visualizing and imagining, and you can imagine that those could have a lot of ethical concerns. So what do you think of those concerns? How can those concerns be mitigated, etc.?
Yeah, obviously extremely important that we consider the ethical applications for stuff like mind reading, right? So the things that we're currently doing to make sure that everything is nice and ethical is, first of all the medical data will be fully anonymized, so that we can't trace back the data to an individual person. We're working hard to make sure that that is fully anonymized, that we have written consent from participants, that we have approval from the IRB, all of that, make sure that we're above board and everything. Also, with this kind of technology, it's important to also consider like what is the current state of things. Right now, it's very difficult. If you even move a couple millimeters, then that completely ruins the signal of the data. If you're not paying attention, if you're doing anything that's not exactly the task at hand, it really ruins the data quality. So I think that's also an important thing to consider. Like this is an MRI machine where you are paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars. The person is consenting. They are knowing that they're being scanned. They have to be aware that they're being scanned and doing the task at hand. You can't just like apply a model without them knowing about it, because it's not going to work. They need to be they have to be doing the stuff that you're telling them to do in the machine for everything to work as well as it does. Now, as things progress, then that opens the door for more important questions of the risk factors of everything. But right now, I think with the current status of the signal that we're working with and how easy it is to obfuscate it, that there's no dangers right now.
Okay. Looks like we do have a few questions in the chat, which is great. There's a question from Jeeve George asking about the potential variable candidate. So I guess this is kind of going back to maybe a little bit of what you're talking about. I guess, yeah, since fMRI can be bulky, what about other technologies like EEG and how those may be used for this purpose as well?
Yeah, so EEG has advantages and disadvantages compared to fMRI, right? So the spatial signal is not going to be very good at all for EEG, but the temporal signal is going to be a lot better. And so it depends on what you're trying to do. If you care about, millisecond temporal dynamics of things, EEG is better than fMRI. When it comes to, trying to reconstruct what someone's looking at, that I think does care a lot more about the signal in terms of spatial specificity. And I think fMRI is better suited to that kind of task. So like for fMRI, we can record a brain volume every 2 seconds or so. With EEG, you're recording, on a millisecond basis, you're getting waveforms. Now, some people can, try to combine different modalities like ECOG, EEG, fMRI, MEG, all of these things. And that might be really cool to experiment with trying to do simultaneous modality stuff. But that is a lot harder to set up. And in terms of like wearable research, I think the quality of the signal gets even worse. So at least right now, I don't really see it working out that great in terms of wearable tech, but who knows, maybe in the future, the tech gets a lot better. Hopefully it does.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah. Okay, someone is asking, yeah, I'll just put this up here. What specific areas of research do you anticipate the fMRI foundation models being most useful for?
I think the foundation fMRI model could be super useful in terms of increasing data quality, of reducing the amount of time that you need to have a participant in the scanner. The potential for pre-processing immediately by using this kind of foundation model, it's hard to even really think about the potential with that. So I think it's difficult to think about like what it would be most viable or usable for, but I think it would at the very least be a very generalizable model that would be useful for any sort of MRI data, at least in terms of like pre-processing at the most general level.
Okay, and we have one last question here. Yeah. Are there also ways and maybe plans to extend this project to other activation patterns, such as memory, for when people, for example, are trying to actively remember things? And I know this is a great question because I know this is very relevant to you. So yeah, I guess you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm in a computational memory lab right now, and one of the applications that we want to be able to do is to be able to not just reconstruct someone's visual perception, but be able to reconstruct people's memory representations, for instance, working memory or long-term memory. And that would be so cool to be able to investigate memory mechanisms by tracking how our representation maybe distorts over time, and look at how that evolves dynamically in the course of the brain, right? To be able to have that kind of fine grain representation of like a reconstruction at the pixel level really is something that would be extremely useful for all sorts of memory related avenues.
Okay, great. I think with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Paul Scotti for presenting this, and very excited by this project and how this moves forward. And yeah, so I think at this point we will, yeah, thank you again, Paul. And yeah, the next speaker is Dr. Akshay Chaudhari. He's at Stanford AI and Medical Imaging Center, and he'll be talking about some of the research they've been doing, fine-tuning stable diffusion on chest X-rays and some of the other work, and how, and yeah, and some of the future directions for this. So with that, I'll give the floor to Akshay, and yeah, and I'll just. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, Tanishq, for the invitation. Very delighted to be able to work with MedARC on this particular project. And for the next 15 or 20 minutes or so, I'm just really excited to chat about some of the work that we've been doing in trying to use some of the fundamental improvements that we've made in generative AI and really trying to apply that for medical imaging. And in this particular project, I'm glad Paul described foundation models. We're really interested in building a vision language foundation model where we can explore generative capabilities for medical images specifically. I'm Akshay. I'm an assistant professor of radiology and biomedical data science. Even though I'm giving this presentation, I'm just a spokesperson for two fantastic students who've worked on this particular project. This work was co-led by Chris, who's a thoracic radiologist and was a postdoc at the Amy Center, as well as by Pierre, who was a master's student at Stanford. So all congratulations should go to them. So very briefly, here are some of my financial disclosures, none that really affect the content of this presentation. So over the last year or so, we've seen an incredible advance in trying to build new generative models. Even though this has been an active area of research where we're trying to generate images, the capabilities as well as the conditioning abilities that we have to steer the output of images has really been staggering. And a lot of fantastic work has been steered by Stable Diffusion as well as the Lion teams. However, if we want to be able to apply some of this work to medical images, it's a little bit challenging. So here we take the original Stable Diffusion model, and then we create prompts such as a photo of a lung X-ray or a photo of a lung X-ray with different sorts of pathologies. We don't really get something that's very useful. These images typically look cartoon-like, and this makes sense because some of the training that was done for these models did not necessarily work with healthcare data specifically. So before we go into some of the work that we've been doing into creating some of these generative models for medical images, let's first ask, why would we want to do this in the first place? And I think there's a lot of potential benefits that we can have for working with synthetic data sets for medical images. I think the first and foremost application that comes to mind is trying to use these images as a form of data augmentation. So for medical imaging deep learning, there's generally a scarcity of labeled training data sets that we have for building any downstream tasks. And these downstream tasks could be classification, segmentation, detection, and so on. So potentially, we can augment our training data sets with synthetic data. We can do this for rare diseases where just the incidence that we might see in the general population is quite low. And because of this, we'll end up being faced with a long tail problem for medical imaging tasks. And more recently, there's been a lot of work that's been trying to understand, well, what are some of the biases that are embedded within these models themselves? And potentially these biases are a function of the broader healthcare system, how that relates to data acquisition, how that relates to data processing, and potentially data augmentation could be one way in which we can mitigate some of these. So just some early preliminary work that we did shows here the benefit of training with real images, so the line in blue, as well as synthetic data for a chest X-ray classification task. And we see that for different amounts of images, ranging from 1,000 to 5,000 all the way to 30,000, we see that training classification models only on synthetic data can provide as much utility almost as training on real images. So these are just all very preliminary results, but hopefully promising to pursue this work. Next, there's a lot of really interesting work on trying to preserve privacy because at the end of the day, we're working with patient health data. There's other approaches such as federated learning, trying to build foundation models that could be fine-tuned in a few-shot manner, but potentially synthetic data can help with all of these different techniques rather than be a competitor to them. Another area of interest is the explainability of different downstream classification models. Trying to understand whether or not your model is actually reacting to spurious correlations could be investigated by prompting with different synthetic data sets where we know what the answer should be, and we're just trying to react to whether or not the classification models that we're working with provide the same outputs that we would expect. And I think another really large area is trying to improve medical education. If instead of having to curate through our packs and see what are good examples for teaching new residents, new fellows, new clinicians broadly, can we just create high quality images that could be used from an education perspective? So these were really some of the guiding principles that we had in trying to fine tune pre-existing models like Stable Diffusion to get them to work for medical images. So for the next 5 minutes or so, I'll talk about how can we go from this original Stable Diffusion model to something that's a bit more expressive and something that can actually create very high fidelity images that look like this. They could be prompted to compose different sorts of medical images with different pathologies. And maybe for the sake of time, I'll skip this particular slide. But we know that the stable diffusion model has great expressive capability. And if we break down the stable diffusion model, there's a few fundamental components that we really wanted to investigate to see how can we adapt this from a natural distribution to a medical imaging specific distribution. So the first part of the model is a variational autoencoder that we use to be able to project images in any data into a lower dimensional manifold and to be able to reconstruct it in as lossless a manner as we can. Then the stable diffusion model has a denoising unit, and this unit is basically the foundation of the generative model that uses conditionings that one can get from different sources. And then we have different methods of conditionings themselves. We could have semantic maps, we could have text, and we pass these embeddings that we get from these conditioning methods into the diffusion unit too. So now that we've broken down the model into the three fundamental components, we really wanted to see what needs to be done for each of those components to allow them to represent medical images. So the first question that we asked ourselves is, well, let's just look at the variational autoencoder. And we wanted to see whether this variational autoencoder is actually capable in representing features that are prominent in medical images. And right off the bat, we're very impressed by the capabilities that this model had. So what we did was we would pass in images of chest x-rays that we sampled from public data sets, such as the MIMIC dataset and the CheckSpert dataset. And we would just pass these images and evaluate the output image reconstruction quality from the variational autoencoder. And we were able to evaluate this with two metrics, that of structural similarity and peak signal to noise ratio. These are common metrics to assess image generation fidelity. And overall, our conclusion was, even though there might be small variations per data set, overall, the representational quality for these images is quite good. There are some challenges in trying to recreate text that's in these images, but this has generally been noted as a problem in emergence for foundation models anyway. But our goal was more on trying to recreate the radiological features. And in general, the VAE was quite expressive to do this. So some early work that we had was, now that we know that the VAE is capable in representing medical images, can we actually work with the denoising unit and the conditioning agents to be able to do so? And initially, since we know that the VA is capable in high dimensional representation, if we just simply take the pre-trained stable diffusion model, pass in a prompt that we care about, we'll get something that's not necessarily pleasing. So our next goal was, how can we actually take this particular model as it stands and be able to adapt it to represent medical images? And this work was a few months ago, right after the stable diffusion paper came out. So there are a lot of different approaches that one could take. A couple of these approaches, such as textual inversion and textual projections, really focus on improving the conditioning for the particular models. And then there are some approaches, such as the dream booth approach, that would leave the VAE and the conditioning frozen, and then it would just try to adapt to the unit. For the sake of time, I won't necessarily be going into the specifics of any of these models. All of this is available in our manuscripts that are uploaded and publicly available. But I just wanted to recap the highlights that we had with this particular model. So here, we had a little bit of a dense experiment, but I'll try to break it down here. So let's only focus on the main results here. We generated 100 different samples for chest x-rays. 50 of them were normal chest x-rays, and 50 of them had a pathology in them of that of pleural effusion. So it's basically, pleural means lungs, effusion means water. So basically, we had this nice balanced data set of normal as well as pathologic images. And we're able to generate these images with a few different approaches. We had the original stable diffusion model, textual projections, textual inversions, and the dream booth approach. And what we did was we took a pre-trained model that was trained on real images, and the goal of that pre-trained model was to be able to perform classification with a high accuracy. And when we actually passed in these synthetic images, we saw that methods such as the dream booth approach, the unit that's been trained with the prior, actually had a near perfect area under the curve for accurately classifying these images. So this gave us a fair amount of confidence saying that we actually are capable in representing medical imaging data. So this was our first start, which made us quite happy about the results that we got. And then we decided to take this approach to the next level because a lot of these initial approaches that we evaluated were meant for very few shot fine tuning, where we had maybe tens, maybe a few hundred examples of the domain that we're adapting to. But luckily, with medical imaging, we work with slightly larger data sets. And in this case, we're working with the MIMIC and the CheckSpurt publicly available data. So we had thousands of images that we could potentially work with. So given this larger size of data, we wanted to see, well, how can we actually go further than the dream booth approaches? So we really evaluated a few different approaches where we're fine-tuning the overall model. And again, there are quite a few different mechanisms that we tried to do this, where we fine-tune just the UNet, we fine-tune both the UNet and the clip encoder. We also evaluate domain-specific text encoders because we know that clinical text is in a different distribution as routine text that one might come across in Wikipedia or rely on data sets. Then we also had a baseline comparison where we initialized the UNet randomly. And again, I don't want to go into very many of the technical details, but we saw that because we probably had enough data, that fine-tuning both the UNet and the clip text encoder worked the best. And these are some of the results that we'll be reporting throughout the slides. And before I go into any of the images, I think something that's very important for us is to be able to come up with accurate benchmarks to evaluate how good a model really is. Because without good benchmarking, you don't really know how to compare different approaches, how to evaluate the value of the things that you're building. So this is something that we were quite conscious in thinking about, where not only do we want to just generate these images, but we really want to be able to evaluate the quality of the images that are being represented. So in general, this was some nice work at a ICML paper by Ala et al. That talks about what should a generative model really focus on in terms of the output and how do we actually quantify this. And I think there's three major criteria that we were also focusing on. The first one was that of fidelity. And hopefully this makes sense that the chest x-rays that we generate should actually resemble real data that one might expect to sample in a clinic and so on, because this is the fundamental reason why we're trying to build this model. The second tenet is that it should be diverse. So for example, if we provided the same prompt, can we generate a nice diversity of images? Because if our goal downstream is to be able to use these examples to fine-tune a classification model or train a classification model from scratch, we really want to be able to learn the entire manifold of spaces that these images exist on, rather than only sampling one particular spot in the manifold. I think for this reason, some of the diffusion-based models are nice because they rely on some inherent stochasticity that comes from the noise-based Markov chain modeling process. So luckily, diversity was something that we could actually evaluate in our data set. And lastly, we're really interested in trying to evaluate how authentic are these images. So if we fine-tune the Stable Diffusion model with a set of chest X-rays, does the model simply just output those images over and over again, maybe with a little bit of noise on top or maybe some adversarial perturbations? So these were the three main criteria that we're interested in looking at. So from a first perspective, I think there's been a nice progression of the fidelity of the images. So on the leftmost column, we see the original Stable Diffusion output. And then going right, we see the Dream Booth approach, which only fine-tunes the UNet in a few-shot manner. And then we also have the Röntgen approach, which evaluates the real images that we've been able to generate. And on the right, we see real chest X-rays. So over time, the fidelity of these models is really increasing, and the generative capabilities that we have tend to resemble real chest X-rays too. So this was a very promising first start. Next, we wanted to be able to evaluate diversity of what sort of representations can actually be in these generated models. And this is one of the big benefits of being able to work with someone like Chris on the team, who's a thoracic radiologist to begin with. And maybe this is a bit of an aside, but whenever working on clinical problems, it's really nice to be able to have a clinician on an intimate working level, just so we can actually evaluate some of these images. And here are some very nicely annotated images where we can prompt our model with different sorts of pathologies. So we could have pathologies such as cardiomegaly, consolidation, edema, and so on. And Chris has very nicely marked what radiologists look for. And a lot of these observations come up pretty nicely on the images that are generated. And then the other perspective that we had was, if we simply prompt the model multiple times, what sort of images do we get? So here we had an experiment where we prompted the image, prompted to generate images 4 times, and then we evaluated the structural similarity of these images with the goal to actually minimize the resemblance, because the lower your structural similarity, the more diverse your image outputs are. So here we are seeing a considerable amount of diversity, although this is something that can always be improved, and this is something that can always be expanded upon. And lastly, like Ed mentioned before, we really want all of this to be medically correct. We want this to be factual. And it's surprising how well these images turn out, because, like I mentioned, a lot of the findings here actually represent what radiologists would look for in the clinic itself. So these are all human-centered evaluation criteria. But at the same time, we wanted to evaluate some data-driven evaluation metrics too. So I'll just describe a few approaches that we did here. So originally, we started off with some training data sets that had some original chest X-ray and some radiology report associated with it. With this radiology report, we trained a text-to-image model that generates a synthetic image. And just as a reminder, this is our model that's called Röntgen. But now, once we have the synthetic image, we can actually take other pre-trained models that simply take this pre-trained image and then generate a synthetic radiology report. So now, in theory, for the same radiology report, we have the original as well as a cycle-consistent report that should have exactly the same text. And by comparing the original report versus a synthetic report, we can actually evaluate how similar those representations are. And this leverages some of our pre-trained models that we've been building in the first place. An extension to this approach is using something known as RadGraph, which is a really nice data set that actually uses radiology reports and has a nice semantic structure so that we can evaluate how different words relate to each other in terms of concepts, in terms of anatomies. And the benefit of this RadGraph is we have end-to-end and differentiable models that can evaluate the quality of these RadGraph embeddings. And that's what we do. So instead of comparing just the synthetic report to the original report, we try to evaluate the similarities of the different RadGraph embeddings. And again, don't really want to go into the specifics, but we're very impressed at how high fidelity we could actually have with some of these generative capabilities. So now that we were pretty happy in terms of the quality of the generated images, we really wanted to see, well, what is the real benefit that this synthetic data offers? So we had an experiment where we trained a downstream classification model with 1,000 images. We also trained with only 1,000 synthetic images. And then we trained with these combined. And we saw that when we train with both real and synthetic data, we can actually outperform the benefits that we get only with real data sets. So hopefully this goes towards the same conclusions of data augmentation. And then again, I'll probably skip this for the sake of time, but once we scale to a higher number of synthetic and real images, we still keep seeing these benefits. So there really is a lot of potential to use this for the data augmentation purposes that I described previously. We've put a lot of time and effort into training these models, and our goal is to be able to make this as publicly available as we can. So there's a nice website where you can read the paper and request access to the weights too. So maybe trying to conclude over here, not everything is always rosy and peachy in research. So I do want to mention some of the limitations and challenges of these methods. So first of all, we're not actually generating real medical images here that are typically in the DICOM format with a high dynamic range, we're simply generating pictures of these. So potential future work can actually try to generate the full dynamic range that would define a medical image. We're still concerned about memorization of the model. Because we're working with patient health information, we want to make sure that we're simply not repeating the same images that exist in these public data sets. And because of this, the model sharing that we have is currently allowed for people who have access to the original data set till we have a better handle on some of these memorization artifacts. There's other challenges, such as how long of a context we can work with the clip embedding. Right now, we're only limited to 2D modalities, but a lot of medical imaging research is higher dimensional with 3D and 4D images. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. And I think while this is really interesting, we still want to really quantify what the real benefits are. So this is an active area of research. So as a conclusion, hopefully we've shown that we have an ability to synthesize high quality chest x-rays and that this synthetic data may be able to alleviate downstream data needs. But I think there's still a lot of fundamental technical and ethical challenges that remain. And we're very excited to be able to explore this with other collaborators that we have at Stanford, with collaborators at MedARC, and we're really open to community involvement to be able to guide some of these research projects in the right direction. And I'd like to acknowledge some of the funding from the NIH that made this possible, as well as extensive compute support that was provided by Stability and MedARC. And definitely want to thank Chris and Pierre for all the hard work that they've done, and very happy to take any questions right now. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, that was a great presentation about fine-tuning stable diffusion for chest X-rays. I think we've all seen stable diffusion and been very excited by it, but also to see its applications in medical imaging, I think that's even more exciting, that it may actually have some interesting real-world impact as well. So that's really exciting. So there are a few questions in the chat that I'd like to get to. So one question, which I think Christian is also in the chat, is kind of addressed it a little bit already, but I also wanted to get your thoughts on, is have you looked into guiding the diffusion process with other forms of guidance other than text prompts, classifier guidance, etc.? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We haven't extensively explored that, and I'll mostly defer to Chris for all the technical experiments that he's done. But I think this is a great idea, and I think this is potentially one potential project that we can undertake collaboratively in MedARC. Right now, our goal is to really understand what are the generative capabilities that these models can have. And right now, it seems like the underlying UNet and the CLIP model is expressive enough. But now, since we have that conclusion, then potentially we can take this to the next level with classifier-based guidance, because we know that we can condition pretty efficiently with these diffusion models. So maybe as a short answer, haven't explored this, but I think that'd be a really exciting area, because now instead of separately creating images and then training downstream classifiers to be consistent, with some of the classifier guidance, it could potentially be somewhat of an end-to-end process itself.
Okay, so another question is, what about training the real models in the VAE latent space?
What about training? So I guess I'm not fully certain what real models in this case corresponds to. If I had to take a guess, maybe if these are the downstream models that you care about, maybe your classification or segmentation models, I think training them in the VA latent space could be nice because it's a more compact representation of what your data is. But I would imagine that you'd still be a little bit challenged about the scale of the training data you're working with. That was the initial motivation for this work. A lot of the training data that we have is pretty limited. So can we potentially use synthetic data to augment that? But yeah, maybe I'm happy to clarify more in the YouTube chat afterwards.
Yeah. Another great question. Can we generate a future X-ray for a patient by inputting past X-rays in medication and cure asthma, etc.?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. And I think this is something that colleagues from Microsoft Research recently did too. One of the benefits, depending on how you want to quantify benefits, is chest X-rays can be performed in a longitudinal manner. When someone goes to the ED, there might be multiple days where patients are getting multiple different X-rays. So instead of conditioning only on a single time point radiology report, I think it's absolutely possible to be able to condition on prior reports too. And this provides you with two unique conditioning opportunities. You can have image-based conditioning. So what did my chest look like yesterday? I still want to be consistent in my latent space. And I can additionally condition on the text itself. So very good question, very good idea. I know there's excitement for the field to work on this too. And I think that's obviously one of the very next directions we can go with this.
Okay, let's see if there are any questions. In addition to X-rays, what areas of medical imaging appear to be candidates for benefiting from generative data sets?
I think all of medical imaging could potentially benefit. I think the challenge is how do we build generative data sets beyond X-rays? I think other application areas that could be a nice segue to this is still imaging that is 2D in nature. So we work with X-rays here, but one could in theory work with dermatology data, one could work with pathology data. We still have images, 2D images, as well as the corresponding text prompts that go with them. I think what could also be helpful is just scaling to higher dimensional imaging like MRI, CT, PET. But I think that becomes a little bit more of a technical challenge because now your image is very high dimensional. So it's harder to have direct correspondence between your language embeddings and what part of the image those embeddings actually correspond to. But I'm very confident that we'll be able to solve some of these problems in the next few years.
Okay, and one last question. What are some of the interesting challenges with 3D data? I guess you kind of were touching on, higher dimensional data. What are kind of the problems and challenges when working with those sorts of data?
Yeah, and I think the challenge fundamentally is sparsity in your data set. So let's say if we're working with 2D chest X-rays, if there's a particular text prompt, something that says pleural effusion, we know or we can learn pretty efficiently where in the image that pleural effusion corresponds to, because the image is relatively low dimensional. But now, let's say if I had a CT scan, where instead of one slice that we see in X-ray, we have 500 slices, understanding the link between where your signal is coming from your language model and which sparse pixels does that correspond to in your 3D CT model, I think that sparsity-based problem is probably one of the challenges that would exist with 3D data. I know there's a lot of work being done with some of the dream fusion approaches to be able to create 3D data sets, but those are slightly different. Those are typically surface renderings. So we still are working with a relatively sparse surface as opposed to medical images that are dense. We don't just care about what's on the outside, we care about what's on the inside too. So these are challenges. I am sure we'll be able to address these, but I think just want to be mindful about where we are and where we can go in the future.
Okay, that's great. I think, I guess one last thing is how can people like contribute in terms of like, some of these projects? I think it seems like this would be a good opportunity for this project in particular would be a good opportunity for people to maybe suggest things that to work on and explore in their own directions. Any thoughts on how people can contribute to this project?
Yeah, I mean, definitely events like this can definitely help spark ideas. There have been a lot of questions that have come up here that we haven't had the time to think about or actually implement. So I think, we can definitely keep an eye on the Discord server. We are trying to make this model as public as we can. Right now, we've been working with the Mimic data set to be able to train this model. So as long as people have access to the Mimic data, we will happily share the model. And maybe we can define a 2 or 3 different questions that we would want to explore as a community, and we're very happy to support that.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank
So at this moment, we'll take just a few minutes, a short break, and we'll come back. And yeah, so please stick around. And thanks again to Akshay for joining us. Okay, so before Jeremy gives a talk, we have here Emad, the CEO of Stability AI, here to quickly jump in. I know he's in between meetings, so we'll keep this brief, but excited and honored to have Emad to briefly mention what he thinks the impact of medical AI and how excited he is for MedARC.
Yeah, thank you, Tanishq. Thank you, Jeremy. Doing. I think that my apologies for video conferencing will solve with AI one day. But on the medical side, so my own history is the manager, and then I took a break when my son was, and then built an AI team to do literature on the ASD literature, and then pathway analysis for repurposing of drugs focusing on GABA. So I did that with a whole team of doctors and to mainstream school. So that was a whole 5 year power of this technology. But it was very difficult. Our current medical system views human, 1,000 tosses of the coin are same as we're not. We're very, very individual, but we had to go. Now this can really personalize and adapt. So I think the real power of MedARC, just as we've seen with that we've all built together, is foundations, both for very specific use cases, general bases as well, around knowledge, radiology, and other things that people can take and extend. Being the open models that can be taken to private user data, building on initiatives.
By the way,
like
your
validation.
voice is breaking up a lot, just letting you know.
It is. Any better?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
can you?
I hope that MedARC
Okay, I
can
think
kind
it's
of.
better, a little bit better now. Yeah.
So my hope is that MedARC can build the foundation model research, both in very specific areas, but to listen and breakthrough medicine in general. And so to support that with the ridiculous amounts of compute, data, and others, to the community to build and bring this technology. That's kind of me. I think, Tanishq, did you want me to discuss anything to kind of bring up?
Sorry, what was that?
Should I discuss anything else? Like I said, really way that we can.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I guess, yeah, where do you see medical AI, I guess, in, say, the next 5 years?
We're going to have this real push towards personalized medicine. The identity architectures that we see, iPhone stack, initiatives, partners at Amazon and others. So adaptable that they can bring them forward. I'd like to do is really put a lot of resource into the literature. So Jeremy had the fantastic paper, the mask studies, right? Bringing them all back to save millions and millions of lives. Infrastructure that's open source for everyone. So we can have the latest information about kind of the healthcare sector and the advances. Like I said, helping build some of these more advanced model sources that everyone talented on this call needs. Independent research and others. Series of primitives that we build around and be able to experiences and medical breakthroughs in the foundation models.
Yeah, it's very exciting what will hopefully happen in the next 5 years, and I think personalized medicine is definitely a very important focus. Yeah, again, it's a little bit choppy, and so it's a little bit hard to understand, but hopefully people are able to understand what Emad, what is Emad saying. But yeah, again, yeah, we really appreciate, of course, the support that Stability AI is providing for MedARC, both through compute resources and through expertise and technical expertise in other forms. And yeah, we're really excited to be part of that Stability AI ecosystem and excited to, I guess, move medical AI forward in this open manner. So thank you again, Emad. I know you have meetings. You're a very busy person, but thank you for making the time to join us for this brief moment to discuss this with us. Thank you.
Yes, it's my pleasure. We'll get all the research in the world a healthier place. Okay, take care.
Yes, sounds great. Thank you. Okay. Glad that Emad was able to join us. I know it was a little bit tough with all the choppy audio. He's traveling in the car to his next meeting, so it was a little bit hard to, he's a very busy person, as you can all imagine. But next up we have Jeremy Howard, who is the president of MedARC, but also a the founding researcher of Fast AI. He's also an entrepreneur, and he's founded many startups, including the first medical AI startup known as Analytic. And also he has led many different AI research initiatives, for example, the VAMRI initiative at University of San Francisco. So we're very excited to have him on board as the president of MedARC, and he'll be talking a little bit about medical AI research and the path moving forward. So thank you again for Jeremy for joining us, and I'll let him take it away.
Great. Thanks very much, Tanishq. I haven't used this system before, so tell me in advance if I press the wrong buttons, but it looks like I click this button here and this button here. And play.
And then I'll just...
Is that working?
Yeah, you're good.
All right, awesome. I wanted to give a brief bit of history, actually, as to my journey in medical deep learning, why I started going down that journey, what it's looked like, and why I'm now getting involved in MedARC and what I think are the opportunities. And I want to go back to the chart that started me on this journey many years ago. This chart was one that I saw when I was involved in the World Economic Forum, and what it shows is the number of doctors. This is actually in Nigeria, but you can look at the graph for other developing countries, and it looks pretty similar in 2012. And at that point, BCG and the WEF predicted how many there would be by 2030. And then they compared it to the number of doctors they would need in Nigeria to have similar coverage of medical expertise to what we have in the West. And so there's this 12x gap predicted. And it's important to recognize that, Lagos in Nigeria is one of the world's biggest cities. The developing nations actually spend more on medical IT than the rest of the world. That's where most of the population is. But there's this extraordinary gap, and it can't be fixed. They thought it would take 300 years to close this gap with existing training infrastructure. So we have a huge shortage of medical expertise. And this is why I'm interested in medical AI. A lot of folks seem to think it's really all about cost cutting and that the main market we should focus on is America. But to me, no, what we should be focusing on is the fact that most of the world can't access high quality medical care. Something else that happened around about that time is there was a Kaggle competition for diabetic retinopathy detection, which was the first time there was a big medical machine learning competition on Kaggle. 600 teams, over 600 teams entered, and the results strongly suggested that a deep learning model, in this case it was one created by a guy called Ben Graham, could basically do a better job of diabetic retinopathy detection than human experts. And so there was this kind of early sign that there were big opportunities for AI in medicine in at least some areas. So I decided to look into this, and in 2014 I went to MICI, which is the main medical imaging conference, because at that point deep learning was really only getting good results in imaging, computer vision. And luckily that year there was a machine learning and medical imaging workshop. So I attended that, and I was stunned to discover that even in this specialist workshop, in this specialist conference, there was a total of one paper that even mentioned deep learning. So to say that at this point in time, deep learning was absent from medicine would be an understatement. I went to the main radiology conference that year, RSNA. There was 0 papers or discussion of AI or deep learning. I spoke to lots of leaders in the radiology space at RSNA that year, and nobody had ever heard of it. It was totally unknown. So despite the fact that nobody seemed to be doing anything about it, I thought I'd give it a try. And as Tanishq mentioned, I started the first company to focus on deep learning in medicine. And the first thing we did was we tried to see if we could identify malignant lung nodules. And you know, the only way to compare these things is to compare yourself to people, I think. So 4 of us spent a couple of months building, you know, honestly, a pretty simple CNN-based algorithm. And we discovered that the false positive rate and the false negative rate at predicting the malignancy of lung nodules was better than a panel of 4 human radiologists. And so, yeah, this continued to make us feel pretty excited that yeah, maybe there are opportunities for deep learning in medicine. And so what I wanted to do at that point was to get as many people working on this as possible, because it felt like a huge opportunity to help fill the gap in lack of access to modern medicine in most of the world. So I made as much of a noise as I could. CNN talked about it. And one of the things I was particularly interested in is, like, would it actually matter even to have these kinds of algorithms? And, you know, well, let's take this example. If you can identify malignant lung nodules early, my gosh, it matters so much. So in fact, actually, in terms of diagnosis, using current standard practice, or at least at the point in time when analytics started, 15% of the time only was when it's the amount of time that lung nodules are identified at the point when they were still localized. The majority of the time, they were not discovered until they were metastasized. And if you discover a lung nodule, you know, after it's metastasized, then the survival rate is 4%. It's terrible. If you find it early, it's 54%. So there's this 10x difference in survival rate depending on how early you pick it up. So it absolutely makes a difference. So yeah, I made as much noise as I could, and lots of people, you know, wrote about this crazy idea of using deep learning in medicine. The reaction in the industry was not great. On the main radiology forums, aren't many. This is vaporware at its finest. It'll be the next Theranos. You'll be wearing black turtlenecks. It's spruced up for non-docs to marvel its brilliance, and docs walk away muttering how stupid it sounds. So yeah, to say the least, the reaction from industry was not entirely positive. Interestingly, the reaction from the mainstream press was almost entirely about whether it's going to put radiologists and pathologists out of work. I didn't see any discussion about whether this actually might help fill the huge shortage of medical expertise in the world. But people really, yeah, focused on this question of is this going to destroy jobs? Anyway, by 2017, at the main conference, RSNA, there were queues out the door for the deep learning talks. It was deep learning everywhere. So it was extraordinarily fast. With 4 years between there being no mention of deep learning, or one mention briefly even at MECI in the machine learning workshop, through to everybody, at least in the radiology field, wanting to talk about deep learning. There was a data science institute popped up at ACR. RSNA launched artificial intelligence initiatives. It was yeah, it was huge. And by 2019, the editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association said, okay, we're no longer accepting papers that show machines are as good as humans at looking at medical images. We already know that. So things moved very, very quickly. And so, you know, my focus on this has always been in like, well, what kind of things can we actually do to make a difference? Like, we don't just want things that are academically interesting, but do these things actually matter? And in medical imaging, you know, there's all kinds of things that you can do to dramatically improve both the productivity and the effectiveness of radiologists. It's very rarely, to me, about automating something or getting people out of work, but it's about, you know, if we're going to fill this huge gap in medical expertise in the world, we basically need to make it so that, you know, so that, for example, nurses can do more of the work as doctors, or non-specialist doctors can do more of the work as specialist doctors, and so forth, and better triage. So something as simple as adding something that auto alerts about a possible stroke, for example. There's a very short window you have to deal with a possible stroke. You know, that can make a huge difference. Or highlight nodules quickly can dramatically speed up how quickly a radiologist can go through something like a lung CT scan. Highlight changes between scans means that you can much more quickly and with less expertise identify changes over time, and so forth. So yeah, my interest was very much on, you know, what can we do to actually help medical experts or people in the medical system do their job better and faster. Now, one of the challenges there was, you know, there's only so much you can do in a single company. And to try to help resolve that challenge, I decided to try to help create more AI practitioners so that more people could use these tools in their own work. So I created this self-funded lab called fast.ai, which is all about making the underlying technology more accessible. I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with that. And it was very successful at helping domain experts become expert practitioners. So for example, Alexander was a radiologist, and he went on to be a joint winner of a Kaggle competition in pneumonia detection. He went on to become a published academic in AI applications of radiology. And, you know, he's a good example of like what happens when you bring domain expertise, you know, in medicine and AI expertise together. You get the best possible results. It wasn't just in medicine, of course. Anybody can work with the fast.ai research and libraries and courses. You know, here's another great example, Christine Payne, who was a classical pianist at this time, 2014, used our courses to help her become an AI expert, and she went on to go to OpenAI, where she worked on music generation with a lot of success. So we've seen it's really important for domain experts to become effective deep learning practitioners, and that's where we generally are seeing the best real-world results. So for that purpose, we launched this thing back when I was at the University of San Francisco called WAMRI, which is really all about bringing medical expertise and deep learning expertise or any kind of AI expertise together. And the basic idea was what would happen if we kind of go out to folks like UCSF and Stanford and to their medical experts and say, hey, what if we gave you access to our AI experts? We worked really closely together. You know, that would help the USF AI folks become more familiar with the medicine, and the medical folks become more familiar with the AI. And it was amazing what happened within the first year. There were multiple successful publications applying AI to medicine. Yeah, things really took off. So for example, this is one that I was involved with. We looked at synaptic vesicles. This is kind of what the low resolution acquisition looks like. You can get higher resolution acquisition, but they're on very expensive machines. They're also very slow, and they also degrade the source material so much that you can only kind of get 1 or 2 slices. So we worked with the Salk Institute to develop a system where we could kind of upgrade this low resolution acquisition to this higher, much easier to read version. And again, the key question is, well, does it actually help humans? And the answer is yes, it helped humans a lot at identifying the synaptic vesicles by human experts. Their false negative rate went down from 43% to 13%. So over a 3x improvement there. And so that's what we were looking for. Now, so for years we really focused on imaging because that's where things worked best. But one of the things then we worked on at Fast.ai was language. We developed a system called Dual MFit, which is basically trying to answer the question, can we train a large language model and then kind of fine tune that to be effective at other tasks? So this was before BERT or GPT or anything like that existed. And it turned out, yes, we can. And then Alec Radford at GPT took that idea and added transformers to it and scaled it up on the compute available at OpenAI, and that became GPT, and things really took off. And so nowadays, yeah, it's not just about vision, but also about language. And of course, language is critically important in medicine. And so now deep learning is showing its capabilities across many modalities that are used in medicine. My view then, now is that, since there's such a clear gap that needs to be filled between, the number of medical experts we have and the number the world needs. We know that deep learning can be so effective across many modalities. And we know now also that the key to unlocking that is to have these large pre-trained models that can then be fine-tuned. There's 2 key things that we need to do to unlock this opportunity. The first is that we need to bring medical experts and AI experts together and help them, merge that expertise. As WAMRI started to do, we need to kind of take that to the next level, grow that a lot more, and then we need to give them access to the pre-trained models and easily available data sets, which we know is kind of the critical piece to allow effective deep learning work to be done much more quickly, much more accurately, and in much less time. And so that's where I see MedARC fitting in, is that we have that opportunity to bring those things together, and so hopefully at MedARC, I see 2 main things happening. One is to be training those foundational models and helping put together the data sets needed. And then the second is to create domain expert, AI expert, cross expertise teams working on specific medical projects, potentially leveraging those data sets and those models to demonstrate what's actually possible. So that's what I'm hoping to help achieve here.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a great presentation about the history of medical AI and your journey as well. And it's very interesting to see the impact that you've had in the field, and of course, how you've impacted, of course, me and so many other people, and allowed us to pursue this research. And yeah, I guess and of course, I'll just open the floor up for questions right now. There's one question here. I guess this is going back to, I think maybe you showed one of the slides about, again, how AI can be used to augment doctors. And then there was one question about how auto stroke alert is expected to work.
Yeah, so I think actually since we came up with that idea, it's become pretty widely studied and starting to be used nowadays. It's a pretty simple triage process where the every scan would not only go into the work queue of the radiologist, but would also go through a deep learning based classifier. The classifier would identify whether there's some significant chance that it shows a stroke. And in that case, then that there is some significant chance, it would basically use the normal EMR system to either increase the priority in the radiologist queue for them to have a second look at it, or even to directly go back into ER or whatever into their workflow. So it's a pretty simple triage process.
Okay. So I guess I'll also ask a question to you that I think maybe others would be thinking about as well. Is of course, yeah. Medicine is, of course, a very it's a very sensitive field where the accuracy and the accuracy of these sorts of models affect life-changing decisions. And you talked about how, of course, these sorts of models are more used for augmenting clinicians and helping with clinicians. But can you talk a little bit more about how you feel these sorts of how important it is to consider these sorts of the impact of medical AI for these sorts of life-changing decisions, and how we should be careful about this, and how what you think the best way is to approach these sorts of challenges in terms of I guess this field where compared to something else like text-to-image generation, it's okay if there's a few errors, that's not a big deal. But in something like medical AI, that's a much bigger concern.
Yeah, I mean, I could speak for weeks about this. In terms of the research itself, I mean, so like obviously just a lot of research needs to be done to understand like what are the good approaches to things, how do we put things together, what works, what doesn't work, so forth. I've always felt like veterinary science is actually a huge opportunity to do a lot of that more fundamental research without having to deal with as much of the thorny ethical issues. Obviously at some point you need to look at human bodies as well, and human medical records as well, but I think you can do a huge amount with non-human animals, just like we do in other types of medical research. When it comes to rolling things out, I think it's really important to prioritize where and what we roll out. So where you're looking. So, for example, last time I checked, there was, I believe, 3 pediatric radiologists covering the whole continent of Africa. So if you're rolling out, something which helps to, and pediatric diseases are very challenging because they, there's a huge long tail. both because kids get weird diseases and also they present different on kids. So pediatric radiology is a really important subspecialty. So, if you can help roll out something in the continent of Africa, which makes it easier for non-specialist radiologists to recognize pediatric diseases and medical imaging, then, you're not replacing a pediatric radiologist. You're just hopefully, enabling the radiologist to achieve similar capabilities to what an expert would. Or, similar thing in many remote parts of China, the nearest hospital is hours away, and, potentially often the nearest doctor is hours away. As we discussed, there's a huge shortage of medical experts in the developing world. So in that case, I think what you're trying to do is something similar, which is you're trying to help a community health worker become, as effective a diagnostician as a capable doctor would be. And it's important to realize that these places often have access to money and the devices, right? They can do the scans or whatever, but they do, that because these parts of the world they're called developing because they're becoming quite rich, But as we discussed, we can't backfill enough expertise quickly enough. So we've got more kind of IT capability than human capability. So in these cases, the hope would be, can we enable the community health services worker by giving them more information or kind of clearly color-coded pictures or, a much clearer kind of bullet-pointed list of things to look at, make it easier for them to become kind of as effective as a doctor would be in that situation. So those are the kinds of opportunities that I would be looking for.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think also, developing countries, that's a really good opportunity for medical AI. And yeah, I think you make a good point about the sort of like IT capabilities versus expertise capabilities. And yeah, it's a very interesting point. I think for the sake of time, it seems like there are a few other questions, but for the sake of time, we will move on to the last session. And of course, if you have any questions, we can discuss this in the MedARC server as well. But yeah, again, thank you to Jeremy for your talk.
Thanks,
It was
Tanishq.
a really insightful talk. Yeah. So next up, I'll be presenting about the vision and mission of MedARC, and again how people can get involved in MedARC's mission and contribute. So let me just share my screen over here. Okay. Let me just. Okay. Okay, so yeah, thank you everyone again for attending today's live stream, and thank you for sticking around to the very end. And I'm glad that you all are interested in MedARC and the mission of MedARC. And I just want to briefly again kind of summarize some of the points that we've talked about here today, and kind of discuss how people can contribute as well. So as we've all discussed and are aware of, there's been tremendous progress in AI research and development over the recent years, especially due to the rise of these sorts of so-called foundation models and also multimodal AI research. Of course, we have these sorts of models like ChatGPT, or which it kind of has very good language understanding, and then some of these other models like GitHub Copilot, that's based on OpenAI's Codex, that's looking more at code and programming, and is serving as a very useful tool for augmenting the capabilities of programmers. And then we've also seen other larger models that have been talked about and discussed, like Google's PaLM model, which has all kinds of capabilities as well. And then on top of that, we've more recently seen the rise of multimodal models, such as the CLIP model that looks at both text and image, and some of these other models that incorporate. So this is like a language model, the Flamingo model from DeepMind that incorporates also a visual component into it as well. And of course, as we all know, Stable Diffusion, which takes in text and produces images. And so it seems like there's this real trend of these large-scale AI foundation models, and as well as multimodal models. And the real question here is that, okay, these models seem to be having a lot of impact in other fields, and will these models have impact in medicine as well? And recently, we've seen some discussion of this as well. For example, here we're seeing recently there was some discussion of ChatGPT passing these medical exams, or I guess what was mentioned as the paper was it was yielding moderate accuracy, approaching passing performance. I guess not passing yet, but getting very close. So it seems like maybe there is some medical knowledge in some of these foundation models. And then there's also some other work looking, again, this was Google's PaLM model. And again, there seems to be some improvement over some of the previous models and getting close to kind of clinician, clinician performance, but not exactly there yet. So it seems like maybe some of these foundation models have some relevant knowledge, but it also turns out it's sort of a mixed bag, I would say. I think some models may have some knowledge, some not so much. For example, here, Stable Diffusion seems to not have a very good understanding of clinical images. Here's an example of the lung X-ray, and also trying to look at some histology. And in both cases, it doesn't seem to understand the prompt that well. And again, we talked earlier about how we can use fine-tuning to maybe improve some of this, for example, in the case of the chest X-rays. So it seems like we have a sort of mixed bag in terms of what these sorts of foundation models understand in terms of medical knowledge. And it would be ideal if we can have good foundation models for medical knowledge to build on top of, because we've seen many different applications of these domain agnostic foundation models with both its zero-shot capabilities and, of course, fine-tuning. And it would be interesting to see how these capabilities could extend into the medical domain. But in order to do so, we would need to have solid foundation models that understand and have medical knowledge. Additionally, there are some key differences between natural data versus medical data, which also can make it challenging and requires different considerations compared to the standard approaches for these sorts of foundation models. Here I'm demonstrating for medical images, but similar ideas are there for other modalities as well, like clinical text and etc. You can see here that the medical images are quite distinct from natural images, which is what most pre-trained or foundation models would look at. And the medical images, seem to have maybe more structure, they're a little bit more homogeneous, but the sort of signals that you're trying to pick up on are much more subtle compared to natural images, where the signals that you're looking at are going to be very distinct and apparent. So this requires us to really think hard about how we can utilize these foundation models for medical data and try to develop our own foundation models that are specialized for medical for medicine. So I think these sorts of differences highlight the importance of these specialized foundation models for medicine. And so we're trying to take an approach that seems to work well for other AI research communities. We've seen a few of these AI research communities in the past, like Eleuther AI, Lion, OpenBioML, and Carper AI. And Eleuther AI, for example, has released data sets that have been used to train many of the large language models, over the past couple of years, and have released their own large language models that have been widely used, and even developed some other techniques like VQ-GAN clip, which kind of sparked some of the interest and the trend of AI art. So these sorts of And then, of course, Lion has released their data sets for text-image pairs, which have been used to train models like Stable Diffusion, and have released some of the largest CLIP models as well. And OpenBioML has been developing their open version of AlphaFold, and CarpRAI has been developing various libraries to support RLHF research, which is the sort of technique that has been used for models like InstructGPT and ChatGPT. So all of these different research communities have been really impactful in the field, and we believe that similar approaches will be very beneficial for the medical AI field as well. So another initiative that Jeremy also mentioned, which has also heavily inspired MedARC, was the VAMRI initiative, where clinicians brought medical problems and data sets and collaborated with machine learning researchers, and again, bringing together these interdisciplinary teams where we have the domain experts working with the folks who can develop the algorithms and the technology. And these sorts of interdisciplinary teams work quite well. And in the case of VAMRI, it resulted in numerous publications and startups like Jeremy had shown. And of course, one of the very interesting papers that was released was the one in Nature Methods that was looking at super resolution. And I find it very interesting because it managed to get the term crapification into the very prestigious journal, which I find quite amusing. But anyway, lots of these this sort of initiative seems to also be very, very beneficial for medical AI specifically, because of the importance of having these domain experts working on these sorts of problems. So inspired by all of these different advances in the AI field and the success of these initiatives, we established MedARC to do a few things. So we believe that an open, collaborative approach to medical AI is needed, and we created MedARC in order to develop these foundation models for medicine, so that we can hopefully build on top of these foundation models and develop tailored applications with these medical foundation models. And of course, we want to build these interdisciplinary teams with a combination of domain experts as well as people with expertise in developing these algorithms in order to address various clinical needs and problems. And the important aspect of MedARC, and something that we believe that we really believe in, is this open approach, where we want to be sharing all of our models and data sets and publishing results, and overall just building an open public community for folks to contribute and share ideas. So how does MedARC operate? So we're a decentralized organization operating mainly through Discord. This has been the case for many of these AI research communities, and it's worked quite well for them. So we are exploring and doing the same as well. And the project information, so we have various projects that are already ongoing, and of course you all have heard of those projects in the first hour of this live stream. And the information for the project and all the organization that's happening for the project is available in our Notion workspace. So this is linked in the Discord. It should also be linked on our website, and you can check that out for more information. And the projects themselves will have their own channels, and if there are more involved projects that may have, for example, several working groups, then they will have their own forums in the Discord, and then there'll be different working groups, different threads for each of the working groups in the forum for that particular project. So that's how we have it set up, for example, for the fMRI project, where we have a bunch of different working groups and different directions that, again, Paul has talked about, the sort of different directions we are interested in exploring. And so we have different working groups for that. And you can check out those threads to see how you can contribute. So, of course, we have a few ongoing projects, and also we will have some more projects that we will share in the next few weeks as well. But maybe there are also projects that you guys are interested in working on, and again, trying to put together these interdisciplinary teams. Maybe you're a clinician or an academic who has an interesting problem, and you want again ML expertise, but also resources to work on this project. So we are open to suggestions for other projects as well. I think the main aspect that to keep in mind is that getting these sorts of data sets is what we are most interested in, and that's kind of being able to have the data sets to be able to work on these problems. So if you are aware of the data sets, or you're able to provide the data sets, that will make this will be very important for the success of the project, of course. And we have project proposal templates that are available again on the Notion. So it's a kind of a short a template where you kind of describe the research that you plan to do. It talks about the sort of challenge that you're trying to solve and some of the prior work, what may be unique about the approaches that you are proposing, the impact of the project, and of course the research plan and the sorts of resources and timeline, and also the output that you hope to have. So the expectation is that projects will release some sort of artifact or output at the end of the project, or even in between the project as well. And this may be in the form of data, models, or publication, and ideally all three. And that would be the expectation, unless there are, of course, good reasons not to. And oftentimes there are good reasons not to, so that we completely understand. But if possible, we want everything to be again open, because this is that where we want everything to be as open as possible at MedARC. Okay, so how do you get involved? I think we kind of talked about that a little bit already, but just to make it clear, you simply join our Discord and find a project that you're interested in. You can also discuss with folks in the various channels, and of course you can propose your own project if that's something you're interested in, and if you have a good, well-defined project that you want to work on. And compute will be provided when necessary. So again, you can request a budget for the compute, some sort of compute budget, how much GPUs you want to use, and we will discuss that with you and see what we can work out, and provide whatever compute would be necessary to carry out the research. And of course, again, going back to this, if you are a clinician or an academic with an interesting clinical problem and relevant data sets, please be sure to contact us. And you can, of course, message us in the Discord, or you can also email me as well if you want to discuss this further. So yeah, thank you all for joining our live stream. You can check out the links here, and of course you can check out the YouTube description. You can check out our website, and you can of course join the Discord server for more information. But with that, I would again like to open up the floor for some more questions. And if you have any more questions about MedARC and how it operates and the vision for MedARC, please be sure to put it in the chat. Okay, Jeep George is asking, let's see here. Are you guys planning any hardware projects sometime in the future? I'm an electronics guy. Okay, that's a great question. For the time being, we are focusing on just software projects and AI projects. And in the future, we will see how that goes. And depending on the resources that we have available, we may explore other areas as well. But right now, the main focus is medical AI, and yeah. But feel free to discuss those sorts of ideas and have those discussions in the MedARC server as well. Any other questions? Are you planning to integrate? Okay. Are you planning to integrate this models in a web software? So we are mostly focused on the research side of things rather than deployment. You know, we aim to maybe have some of these models available as demos, for example, for people to explore and try out, just for research purposes, of course. So that's, I think, maybe the closest we would get to, like, I guess, integrating it into some sort of website or something like this. You know, some sort of web demo might be available depending on the project and what can be done. But yeah, hopefully that addresses your question. Okay, I'm a senior medical student. If I'm interested in a project, how much data set do I need to collect? So it depends on the data set, again, or the project rather. And I think this is something that, you know, you would have to discuss with, you know, for example, some professors or academics at your institution to see what kind of data they are able to provide. Alternatively, you could also try to find some public data sets as well. So in some cases, there will be public data sets available for different projects. For example, with the fMRI project, we were able to work with a public data set, and actually also for the chest X-ray project also, that's using a public data set. So ideally, actually, yeah, we want to be able to use public data sets, and then yeah, maybe you can start out with these public data sets and work later on private data sets and kind of you know, expanding the research to that. But yeah, in terms of also how much data to collect, I think that depends per project and the scope of the project. For example, I think if it's more on sort of like fine-tuning on a specific task or something like this, and there's some sort of pre-trained model available or foundation model available, then you can work with maybe a less amount of data, like maybe only, I don't know what kind of data, maybe it's like X-rays, and maybe you can work with only like a few hundred or 1,000. But if it's something that it's on the, like, the project is more on training us pre-trained model or foundation model or something on that end, then of course that's going to require a lot more data in order to be able to successfully train a model that can, you know, learn these generalized representations. So I hope, hopefully that addresses your question, and let me know if you have any more questions in the chat. Okay, is there a mechanism to prevent accidentally overspending on the cluster? Equally, are there any other particular liabilities we need to be aware of as a researcher / volunteer? Thanks. Okay, so with the cluster, this is utilizing the stability AI cluster. So all of the research will happen through stability, or any sort of compute that we will provide is you know, through the stability AI cluster, and they have a high performance computing team that is monitoring usage, and, you know, they have limits on usage and all kinds of things like this. So they will manage all these sorts of things. And again, projects will have specific budgets that they must fit within, and so all of this will be managed accordingly. So this shouldn't be much of an issue in terms of, yeah, any accidental overspending or things like this. So, but yeah, again, when you have a project and you're working on this, you would be talking to the HPC team, and we would be able to discuss this further. Okay, so someone says, I want to create a data set for the purposes of vital sign estimation, heart rate, respiration rate, blood pressure, blood oxygen saturation from a video of a face. Can I apply with this kind of project, or are you looking for more foundational models? So it's funny that you mentioned this. This is actually a topic that I've also been very interested for quite some time, actually. In fact, I've done a couple projects on this sort of non-contact heart rate estimation from face in my bachelor's degree as my senior design project. And, you know, so this is actually a project that, you know, I find very interesting. And in terms of this project, yeah, I think the main aspect is being able to get the data sets for this project. I know there are a few data sets available already, but I would be happy to support this project. And yeah, again, we are looking for not just foundation model projects, but also exploring some of these specific clinical applications and how we can address specific clinical applications as well. So if there are any specific clinical applications and you have a well-defined project, then we can discuss. And again, also having access to those data sets, then I think we can discuss supporting those sorts of projects. Any other questions? Of course, if you have any other questions later on, you can ask them in the Discord channel, or again, you can send me an email for more, if you want more information. Do you foresee research projects being supervised by yourself and involving remote data? Unfortunately, the radiologists in my department are not interested in AI research. I don't fully understand your question. I think there is if it's a remote data, if I don't know if you maybe mean like it's on premise at the hospital or something like this, and maybe it's hard to provide that data to external institutions. I'm not entirely sure if that's what you mean. But in terms of like, yeah, I think for at least for the time being, most of the projects will be, we do need to be able to, get access to the data. Of course, that data will be de-identified and anonymous data, but we would, and in accordance with any of those sorts of privacy concerns. But it would, we kind of would need that data to be able to use it on the cluster. But in the future, we would be interested in maybe looking into, for example, federated learning approaches and other sorts of approaches that may allow, not necessarily having to, have the data in a centralized location and, kind of work more remotely with the data. Hopefully I addressed your question there. I'm not sure if that was exactly what you were looking for, but yeah, that's kind of the current state right now. Okay, would the data from the fMRI project be made public? If so, what is the timeline you expect it to be public, or at least within the Discord? The fMRI project is right now utilizing a public data set, the natural scenes reconstruction data, natural scenes data set. And so that data set is already publicly available, that data set that we're creating and testing our models on. And then also, I guess, Paul has collected some data sets as well, and he's already released some of that already, and he'll release any more data that he will collect in the future. In terms of the results, we're going to be sharing some of those results soon, I would say, I guess within the next couple months. And so that would probably be in the form of a preprint or something like this. So that's kind of the current research that we've done so far. And then of course, there's still gonna be more research to do and future directions later down the line. So, but what we've done so far, that will be released as a preprint in the near future. Yeah, so hopefully that addressed your question. And yeah, again, we want to make everything public and open for others to also be able to build off of. Yeah. Okay. Again, yeah, like I mentioned, if you have, oh yeah, it's okay. I guess one last. Yeah, I guess one last question here. Are catalog datasets a good place to start doing research for a particular project? So I think it depends. I think at least for the sorts of projects we've been exploring so far, I think there haven't been many good Kaggle datasets for that. I think it depends on the project. I think there are some really good ones, and I think it's worth exploring some of them for different tasks. But yeah, I think again, if it's for I guess a well-defined project, I think if you're working with Kaggle datasets, it's also like more if you're interested in exploring some novel approach to a particular problem, because again, a lot of those Kaggle datasets are already maybe projects that, or sorts of challenges that people are already working on and exploring. So if you're working on that, then I think Kaggle datasets are good for exploring some sort of novel approach that you want to try out. And also, it's a good maybe starting point before moving on to other data sets maybe bigger data sets or something, or other data sets that we could get our hands on. So I think depending on what you want to do, yeah, Kaggle data sets can definitely be a good starting point for some sort of medical AI research project. And depending on what's what you're working on and what's available on the Kaggle website. Yeah. Okay. I think that's the last question then. And so just to again conclude, thank you everyone for joining us today. And if you have any more questions, feel free to put it in the MedARC Discord server. The link of that is available on our website. And again, if you're interested in contributing, again, join the server and feel free to contribute. And excited to be starting this new organization and looking forward to how this progresses over the over the next few months, and excited for all the research projects. And thank you all for joining us today. So yeah.